Well, good morning to you, and welcome to the third of our Bible talks about Moses. First of all, though, this morning I want to introduce you to a new little book that I've discovered. It's called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, and it's a book written by Charlie Mackesy. It's a delightful little book. It's full of wonderful conversations between the four characters, the boy, the mole, the fox, and the horse. And this morning, I was particularly struck by one of the conversations. What's the bravest thing you've ever said? Asked the boy. Help, said the horse. What a wonderful little conversation that was. And asking people for help is a very, very brave thing to do because actually we're admitting that we can't achieve what we set out to on our own. It's an admittance that we just can't cope with this task that we've got ahead of us. And sadly, though, in today's culture, asking for help is often seen as a sign of weakness. It's an admission that we can't cope on our own. But the story of Moses is one which shows us that we shouldn't be afraid to ask for help, because Moses knew clearly that the task that had been given to him was well beyond his capability. He constantly needed encouragement, guidance, and the support of others along the way. And especially, he recognized his need to have God's support alongside him. Now, as he went on, Moses became a much more confident leader of God's people. And that's because he knew that God was with him in all situations. And this book of Exodus that we're looking at is full of examples of how God gave that support to Moses in different situations as different challenges were met along the way. And I would love to speak to you about some of those examples, but unfortunately, time this morning doesn't allow us to do that. So I'm going to just choose one specific incident um, in the ongoing story of Moses and to see exactly how God helped him in that situation. But a quick reminder of where we're at in the story. Moses has led the Hebrew peoples out of Egypt. They had wandered fairly aimlessly through the desert, but God had guided them and God had protected them along the way. And now God has instructed them to camp near to the Red Sea. And so we're going to pick up from that point in today's reading. It's quite a long reading, so please bear with me. Exodus chapter 14, beginning to read at verse 5. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariots made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites, who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified, and they cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through on dry land." Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, in leading God's people out of Egypt, Moses had certainly had his fair share of challenges. He'd been challenged by, well, his own feelings of inadequacy. He'd been challenged by the enormity of the task that God had given him. It was a huge task, it was a risky task. He'd been challenged by the resistance, by the fear, by the panic of the Hebrew people that he'd come to rescue. He'd been challenged by their constant whinging. He'd been challenged by the threat posed by Pharaoh and his mighty military machine. He'd been challenged by the difficulties of the desert environment, the barrenness of the desert. And now here he is on the banks of the Red Sea with another formidable natural barrier in front of him. How on earth was he going to lead God's people across this mass of water? And that makes us sit back and reflect, doesn't it? How many challenges we've faced on our onward journeys with God. How many barriers have we had to cross in our time to achieve what we feel God has asked us to do, or to go to where we perceive God has asked us to be? How many challenges maybe are we facing right now? Maybe this is the time to just kind of sit back and reflect on where we are on our journey and to identify what those challenges going forward might be. So let's see exactly what happened to Moses on the banks of the Red Sea. And the answer, quite honestly, an awful lot of things happened. You see, God asked Moses, first of all, and the people to rest, to camp on the banks of the Red Sea. And I think that's a very important point to make right at the beginning. We're reminded that in all of our journeying, we do need places and times for rest. We cannot sustain continuous forward movement all of the time, either as individuals or as churches. There needs to be a series of inbuilt laybys where we can regroup, cease from our striving, and just be still and to listen to what God might be saying to us. I think that's an important first point to make. And God let Moses know that what he was dealing with these Hebrew people was nothing short of a bunch of confused wanderers. But he helped Moses in that. He helped Moses to diagnose the problem he had. He directly intervened to guide and to protect those warriors, those wanderers through that desert wilderness. See, God guided their movement. He protected them from their enemies. And well, God invested a great deal of his effort in his people. And in doing so, he was showing to Moses that what he was doing was important, that he was not going to abandon them. And what reassurance that must have been for the reluctant leader, Moses. And you know, God knew how Pharaoh would react to the news that the Hebrews had now left Egypt, because God knew Pharaoh's heart. With God on his side, Moses had someone who knew and understood how conflict and how opposition can come from outside, and he knew its timing. And with God's guidance, Moses could therefore make the necessary preparations. And in any kind of leadership, it's important that we get some forewarning about the nature and the source of probable opposition. And that's precisely what God gave to Moses. He gave him the heads up, so to speak, that trouble was brewing. But God also helped Moses to handle the internal opposition and the discontent within the camp. The Hebrew people were, after all, perpetual whingers. They had seen God's marvelous and mighty deeds along the way out of Egypt, but at the first sight of trouble, what did they do? They whinged. Why? Why did you bother to bring us out of Egypt? Why didn't you leave us in Egypt? We haven't come out here to die. Why could blah, 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 blah. And Moses responded to them confidently. Don't be afraid. Stand firm. See the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be still. That's Moses, confident, positive, assured. And we're left to wonder how Moses became so confident and so assured. It's the confidence which comes from having experience of seeing God at work. His leadership had been shaped by God. It's confidence that leaders gain when they know that those in authority above them are minding their backs. And very finally, one quick final point to finish. How could he go on? The sea seemed such an insurmountable problem. There didn't seem to be a way forward. But as usual, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And God always finds a way when there is apparently no way forward. Nothing is impossible with him. Very conscious of the time, so I better bring these rambling thoughts to an end. Tomorrow, Debbie is going to be taking over, and she's going to be talking to you about Elijah. Two stories coming up on Thursday and Friday about Elijah. From me, thank you for being with me these last few days. I hope you've enjoyed our little chats about Moses. Hope to see you again. In the meantime, God bless you, and may God continue to watch over you.